A warm welcome to our election briefing on poverty and the cost of living. We've a wide range of guests lined up to give their perspectives on an issue which has been barely touched upon over the past few weeks in the media, even though all the polls show us that it's one of the three burning issues in voters' minds, along with the NHS and immigration. Well, we'll certainly be trying to redress that balance today. If at any stage over the next hour you want to make a point or ask a question, please indicate in the chat box and I'll try to get to you as soon as I can. We have a fair few guests today, so please try to be patient with me. So we'll start with our guests. I'll introduce you by name. When I do, please say in a few words what your organisation does and why poverty matters so much to you. First of all, we'll start with Stephen Bediarco, a social entrepreneur who was awarded the OBE in 2021 for innovation in charity and social enterprise. Stephen says we need a completely different model to fight poverty. Stephen, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Mick. Thanks, everyone, and glad to be here. And yeah, just to say, I think I'm a serial social entrepreneur working in a number of different organizations, but fundamentally, my main organization is Social Innovation Partnership. We've worked with government, foundations, and corporates over the last 15 years to tackle social issues. And my fundamental view is that we really need to reimagine the way we approach understanding poverty. We need government to invest and understand not only the impact of alleviating poverty, but also the connection it has to then happiness, productivity, mental health. And I think we also need to really think about what I call fair wealth creation. So the idea that, a lot of charity work should be geared towards supporting people to gain ownership, build enterprise, and basically share wealth amongst the population. So that's me.
Thanks, Stephen. We'll hear now from Mudassar Ali from the Muslim Charities Forum, which is a network of British Muslim charities working for social good at home and abroad. Mudassar, welcome. Tell us what you do, please.
Thank you for the introduction and the opportunity, Mick. It's a pleasure to be with you and participating in the conversation. So my name is Mudassar Ali. I am the head of development at the Muslim Charities Forum. We are an infrastructure body that supports, connects, and represents British Muslim-led voluntary and community sector organisations of a range of thematic areas and sizes and scales of operating with a few different areas. And for us, poverty is a critical matter to explore, as many of the organisations in our network that we're supporting, connecting, and representing are at the front line of tackling poverty. Whether that's in running some of the nation's food banks, whether it's looking at trying to upskill some members of our communities and other minoritized communities who have close proximity to Muslim communities so they can escape poverty, or whether it's in looking at providing strategic support through things such as housing funds to prevent people from falling into homelessness. Many Muslim-led organizations are at the forefront of tackling poverty, and as their infrastructure body, we have the privilege of learning more about some of the challenges that they're facing and also what we can do to help. So I think that I'm probably quite aligned with many of the points that Stephen has raised already. So thank you very much for that. What we're really looking at, or what we're really looking to call for, is the government to take more of a structural look at what's going on in its efforts to tackle poverty, but also how it makes sure that those interventions are equitably distributed. As we understand that some of the communities that we often work with, or some of the leaders in our networks, are often labeled or termed as hard to reach or as difficult to engage with. So what we want to really understand is that within those interventions, what is the government committing to do to try to make sure that the benefits to come equitably distributed?
Thanks for that, Mudassar. Next up, we'll hear from Gareth McNabb from Christians Against Poverty. Gareth, welcome.
Hi, I'm Gareth McNabb. I'm Director of External Affairs at Christians Against Poverty. We're a Ronson Woodseal charity. We do exactly what it says on the tin. We're Christians who are against poverty. We provide debt advice in partnership with frontline churches right across all 4 nations of the UK, and offer other services like money management support, support on living life on a low income, and jobs clubs, helping the long-term unemployed into work. And our perspectives at the moment are very much geared around the insight that poverty is a political choice. It's a consequence of systems that have been designed and could be designed differently. If together we agree poverty is not something we wish for 14.5 million of our brothers and sisters in British society, then we could and should make different choices as an economy and a society. And we're keen that the understanding of poverty be built on a number of key platforms. It is primarily about material. It is an income problem overwhelmingly, but it's not only about income. It's also about stigma being used as a tool to differentiate between classes and to prop up systems that need to be challenged. And it's also about the public services that all of us rely upon at all kinds of different parts of our lives. If we overly focus on only one of those 3 points, then we won't actually get to the root of things. We're probably likely to find the right kind of outcome when we listen more carefully to the lives of people who actually experience poverty for themselves.
Great. Thanks, Gareth. Thanks for that. Next up, we'll hear from Josh Nicholson, who's senior researcher at the centre-right think tank, the Centre for Social Justice. Welcome, Josh.
Hello, Mick. Thanks for having me. Yes, my name's Josh. I'm senior researcher here at the Centre for Social Justice. So we're a think tank. We are independent. We're dedicated to tackling the root causes of poverty. So we look at all things from work to addiction, debt, family breakdown, and crime. We recently released a landmark report called Two Nations, which gave a fresh, we took a fresh look at the state of poverty across the UK. And we found that the UK is deeply divided. This is 20 years on from when we published a landmark report called Breakdown Britain. The UK is a deeply divided place. There are choices that could be made that would help to tackle poverty in all its forms. And we're hopeful that whoever forms the next government will take the steps needed to tackle poverty across the UK.
Great, thanks for that, Josh. Our next guest is Bishop Mike Royal, who's the General Secretary of Churches Together in England. Bishop Royal, why does the cost of living crisis and poverty in particular matter so much to your organisation?
It really matters. Churches Together in England, we bring together 54 denominations to work together in unity. We are one of the commissioners of the Church Works Initiative, which has been coordinating the Warm Welcome campaign to relieve poverty for those who are struggling to heat their homes and put food on the table. We also, and everything we do is in partnership, have been working very recently in the run-up to this election and during this election period with Citizens UK.
Our next panellist, if you like, is Phil Callaghan from the Northwest section of the Trussell Trust. He's also with us today. As most of us will know, the Trust is an anti-poverty charity and runs a community of food banks throughout the country. Phil, welcome.
Thanks, Mick, and it's great to be with you all today. As you said, the Trussell Trust exists to see an end for the need for food banks in the UK. That's our main mission and vision. But while we wait for that day, we continue to support our network of food banks across the UK. There are 420 plus independent food bank charities that we support in our network, of which there are about 1,200 food bank centres across the UK. I work in the church engagement team at Trussell, based in the northwest of England, but so I see that intersection between people of faith and poverty alleviation. And as Gareth said, we really work with people who use our food banks, who have a lived experience of financial hardship, of poverty, to listen to them and amplify their voices, because we think they're really, really important in this debate and in finding the solutions to an end for poverty in the UK.
Another Phil now, Phil Champagne from the Faith and Belief Forum, which according to their website is all about building good relations between people of all faiths and beliefs, where difference is celebrated. Phil.
Thanks, and good to be here. Yes, I work for an interfaith charity, as Mick says. So we're about bringing the voice of different faith and belief groups into kind of issues that matter to them. And obviously, poverty alleviation is a critical issue. And I think we've seen during the response to COVID and also the current cost of living crisis as well, that faith groups, many around the table here, are very active. We've just published a letter, which is a letter to an incoming government from voices in the faith and belief sector, and this is published with by a group called the Faith and Belief Policy Collective. But really, the message of this letter is for an incoming government to, if you like, be more proactive in engaging with faith and belief groups around policy issues such as this, because I think in the past, there's been a bit of a kind of sticking plaster approach, or a kind of faith and belief groups have been seen to sort of bind the wounds, if you like, rather than being seen as a sort of proactive partner in policy development. So we think that this is a really timely moment for government to engage with a lot of organizations around the table here in being more of a partner for policy development around poverty alleviation. We've seen their capacity, we've seen the values they bring, and we want to see a much more proactive engagement with the sector.
Thanks, Phil. We'll hear now from Paul Morrison from the Methodist Church's Action on Poverty. Hi, Paul. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Paul Morrison. I'm an advisor at the Methodist Church, but I work with the Joint Public Issues team, which is the Baptist, the Methodist, the United Reformed Church, and in some things, the Church of Scotland as well. I think, I don't want to repeat what others have said, but I think it is really the first thing you said, that poverty has not been an issue in this election, that it has not been given the emphasis that it deserves. What the churches have seen in their communities over the past decade or more is a gradual increase in the numbers of people experiencing poverty, but it's the depth of poverty that is now becoming deeply problematic. So 10, 15 years ago, the real issue was finding people and allowing them to access support, because by and large, when support was offered to people in our communities, you could start to build that long, hard process of moving away from poverty. Today, lots of people are given the support and are found and are put to put to the various services that are available, but they are just insufficient to provide the essentials that people need, never mind put them on a platform to get out of to begin that journey out of poverty. And that is holding back so much potential. And as a church, we see that God has put potential in large numbers of people, and it is being stifled by poverty. And that's why it should be at the heart of this election.
Thanks, Paul. Hannah Fremont Brown's also a Methodist. She's the anti-poverty movement coordinator who last year launched the Let's End Poverty campaign, and at the time criticised the seeming ambivalence of our politicians to tackle the poverty issue. Hannah, welcome to the debate.
Hi, Mick. Thank you. It's good to be here. Yes, we launched last year the Let's End Poverty movement, which is a diverse, growing movement of over 60 organisations and hundreds of individuals of all faiths and none who are demanding urgent action on poverty at this election. Over the last few months, we've been having conversations with people in communities across the UK in church-based and community groups about the issues that matter to them. And when we've spoken to people in Sheffield, Epsom, Halifax, Stoke, Camden, and lots of other places, the recurring theme has been that people who are at the sharpest end of poverty don't feel heard by our political leaders or hopeful as we approach this election. They want political leaders to listen to the reality of the challenges that they're facing, that many of our colleagues have spoken about already, and to include them in decision making to reform the system that has the potential to dramatically improve their lives. Our aim is to amplify their voices during this election debate, because we believe that closing the gap between people who are struggling against poverty and people with decision-making power is the key to finding solutions that are fair, that are just, and that will last to solve this problem.
Thank you, Hannah. We'll now hear from Bartek Staniszewski from the centre-right think tank Bright Blue, where he's Senior Research Fellow. Tell us a bit more about your organisation, Bartek, and why poverty matters to it.
Thanks, Mick. So yes, we are, as Mick says, an independent centre-right think tank, and our aim is to defend and improve and to enable the good life in liberal society. And social policy and social security is one of our main foci. And poverty is important to us because more poverty precludes living the good life.
Short and sweet. Thanks for that, Bartek. Finally, we have George Lapshinov from the Theos Think Tank. Tell us a little bit, please, George, about the work of the organisation, which I suspect many of us will know about, but also maybe a bit about the briefing paper you did a few weeks ago about how religious people in Britain feel about the most important issues facing the UK at this time. You had some really interesting findings, didn't you?
Thank you, Mick. So Theos is for those who don't know, religion society think tank in the UK. We are very interested in human flourishing, and maybe in a phrasing similar to my colleague from Bright Blue, do we say that poverty is a hurdle to human flourishing in all its dimensions, and therefore it is also an area of interest for us and for our research. But in our Religion Counts research series, which we have been doing on sort of the attitudes of the British population regarding various policy issues and their social and economic values, we have found that Christians tend to be on average more right of centre economically, more socially conservative compared to the non-religious and to other religious groups. Yet, even including sort of more conservative Christians across the board, there is a broad consensus that the income gap between the rich and the poor is too wide in the UK. This concern is even shared by Anglicans, who are predominantly sort of conservative voting, 2/3 of whom recognise that differences in income are too high. Additionally, 92% of the total population and 88% of Christians in the UK think that the current government has poorly managed the cost of living crisis. This is a very significant consensus on the economic question, and it is a sign of how bad the situation is, because it's quite rare that the whole country can get behind one vision of where we stand economically. More speculatively, I would say that the British election study data doesn't say this, but my interpretation of this is that this consensus suggests that there is widespread demand in the UK for policies aimed at reducing income inequality and for policies that would address rising living costs and improve economic stability, especially for lower and middle income families. I think, sort of stretching the data even further, there might be a case that the UK population is willing to tolerate more costly policies to the taxpayer at this time than ever before if they can help tackle these economic issues and reduce inequalities.
And do you lobby the government on those findings at all, George, or is it just out there in the public domain?
For our sort of theory of change, we sort of don't go out and protest in front of Westminster Palace, but we target individuals in government, in civil society, in Parliament, and we try to sort of bring the message across to them.
Thanks for that, because I mean, a number of people have made the point that it's actually getting their voice heard that's one of the major problems that they'll find. Shall we look at some of the manifestos, some of the big moments from the manifesto today? And let's just talk through some of them. If you want to react to anything anybody said, please do so. Just indicate on the chat and we'll hopefully come to you. But one of the overriding headlines among many anti-poverty groups is, for example, the two-child cap. Now, it's been given some publicity, has it not, that the Labour Party has not committed itself to getting rid of that. The Liberals have, and the Green have another. How important is that kind of thing that some of you might call short term? But how important is that policy? Do you think, say, Hannah Freeman Brown, do you think that would be, say, going towards a more equitable society? It's got to be done in steps. It won't be done quickly. But how important is the two-child gap as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, I think a lot of us would say that eradicating the two-child limit would be one of the single most effective ways of lifting the most children out of poverty. You say it's short-term. getting this right at the beginning of children's lives is a long-term investment in their success. It's in their future. It's in them contributing to our communities. We have far too many children in the UK not only living in poverty, but living in destitution, which is and should be unthinkable for us as a society. We need those kind of building blocks committed to by political leaders. Like you say, it's a long roadmap towards ending poverty, but unless we have those things in place, we're not going to see the kind of change we need. That could be a really clear, easy step that a new government could take to move us in the right direction. I think it's really something we'd be hoping for.
And are you confident or otherwise that the new government will do that? Because not many of them have actually committed to it, are they?
I think if they listen to communities, I am confident that if they listen to and hear communities, they'll see that it's something that communities want from them. I couldn't comment on whether a Labour government would implement that early days, but I hope that they would listen, and I hope that if they do, they would hear that from communities, that it's something we're really calling for.
Did anybody expect that to be in the Labour Party manifesto, for example? And were they disappointed it didn't happen, or it's under review, so it might come up sometime? Has anyone got any comments on that at all?
We were pretty certain it wouldn't appear in the Labour Party manifesto. It was explained to us quite clearly throughout our engagement around the manifestos that there would be nothing that wasn't fully costed, and that this was expensive and there isn't enough money. That said, I think the language that the Labour manifesto has begun to use around food banks being a moral scar is another reason why the two-child limit really does need to be addressed, because there's a way to remove the two-child limit that's based on what it does to children and the destitution and the long-term effects, which is just terrifying and really important. But there's also an important principle that could be demonstrated by the next government, whoever it is, in removing the two-child limit, in that, one, it's deliberately punitive, and that should have no place in our social security system at all. A carrot and stick approach is not the way that any government should speak about citizens. None of us deserve to be hit with a stick, whether it's coloured brown or orange. But secondly, it's an ineffective policy because while the common understanding of it is, well, why should people have children that they can't afford? It's a policy that catches you after children have been born. It breaks the fundamental promise of social security that humans deserve the support based on their need rather than other qualifying factors. So I'd like to see the two-child limit gone, not just because of the deep destitution it causes and scars communities and families, but also because it's fundamentally ineffective and plays to the audience of wider society, building on that stigma that we want to see drawn out of society.
I just wanted to add on the point of removing the two-child cap being a short-term measure. If you look historically at the way that this country used to distribute benefits for the number of children that a parent or that a household has, and actually if you look at many countries nowadays, they used to have the reverse of the incentive structure that this country has nowadays. They reward having more children rather than they reward having fewer children. If you look at Hungary, if you look at Poland, you actually get more children the more children you have, and this country used to do that as well up until the two-child cap was introduced. And we are now facing a demographic crisis whereby we're getting more and more old people in this country and fewer young people. We are not having children at the replacement rate. We're having children below the replacement rate, even though we know that women want to be having more children than they actually are having. This suggests that the reason they're not having those children is financial. What this will lead to decades down the line, not even decades, it's already a problem today, is that working age people will not be able to afford to pay for the pensions of the older people. As we have more and more older people who are paying less in tax, who are not working, and fewer working people who are paying those taxes, who are providing for those pensions, it'll just become an unaffordable burden on the state. And this will put pressure on every single over expense. It will mean that we will not be able to spend on over social security projects. It will mean that spending will become more competitive in over government expenditures, such as defense, such as education, because pensions will take up so much of the government budget unless we fix this demographic crisis, unless we start having more young people, more children, and breaking down financial barriers to having more children by removing the two-child benefit cap. I think we go some way towards that.
Thanks, Bartek. Josh Nicholson from the Centre for Social Justice. You'd like to make a comment on this, on the CSI's proposal, a proposal focusing on the age of children through a new family credit.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so we published a report on this this week, and we made the case that instead of focusing on just the number of children in the household, actually looking at age might be more important. So we know through our own research that children under the age of 4 are more likely to be in poverty. These are formative years. So we've made proposals through a new family credit, which is a radical new way of thinking about early years support and childcare. So we'd be proposing that child benefit gets front loaded at age 0 to 4, which would give a huge financial boost to families. An annual award for children under 5 of £3,700 per year, £70 per week per child. We also propose a new childcare budget that would be paid directly to parents. So this would put much more flexibility into the childcare system. It would take account of what parents actually want, which is most of the time to actually spend more time with their children, as well as a transferable, expanding the transferable marriage allowance to 100% of a married and or civil partnered personal allowance. So really focusing on age might be actually the more productive policy here, and looking at how we can really support children in those early years, which we know is so important.
Has anyone got any comment on that? Because one of the revealing things of the various papers that we've been published over the past couple of months is that that's where the deep poverty lies more than among older people, and they have the triple pension lock, of course, whereas a number of reports I've read saying the big problem is with young people, but that's not an electoral target for all of our main parties necessarily. Has anyone got any comments on what Josh has said there and how that maybe conflicts with that?
I think that where we can see some alignment in that and what's being reported to us from some of our sort of network organizations are in some links to what we see in the housing situation. So that's in particular with members of Muslim communities and other minoritized communities by different protected characteristics, whether that's race or other communities, being overrepresented in temporary accommodation. In particular in inner city London boroughs such as Newham, Redbridge and others, where the proportion of households who are in temporary accommodation is significantly higher than the national average. So where that seems to echo some of what Josh is talking about around thinking about age, is that what we also do understand is that there's a greater likelihood of some younger families or people sort of in a sort of the younger end of the age spectrum being represented amongst those in temporary accommodation as well. And we know that the housing as sort of a topic and as a matter is something which is coming up quite a lot in pledges amongst parties, but what we're not necessarily seeing too much on is how much of a commentary there is to actually protect those who are at the fringe of homelessness. So what's going to be done to try to protect those who are at the fringe of homelessness? Because what we understand from some research that's been done from one of our member organizations is that one of the interventions that they have, which is the UK Housing Fund, actually has the potential to save economic costs of £77 for every pound that they invest in supporting people with housing arrears through their housing fund. So I think that there is definitely a case here to explore what can be done to support younger people to ensure that those who are at risk of poverty or already experiencing poverty have more agency for a longer duration of their lives.
Thanks for that, Mudassar. I'm glad to see Stephen Bediaco is back. Stephen, I think you caught most of what Mudassar said there. What's your view on that? Because you're quite openly saying we need a whole new system of tackling poverty. We need a whole new infrastructure. Do we not?
I agree with a lot of what has been said about the 2-child cap, and I think as well, just from some of the work that we've done over the years, working to design programs for government, this issue is also a stock and flow issue for parents, right? It's looking after that child right through to the teenage years, and I think being able to support all the way through to 18 is important. But I would also say the other part of this argument is also about how are we giving families access to opportunities to build wealth and to access wealth, right? I think there's been a huge amount of wealth creation that has occurred in the last 40 years, and there needs to be a fairer redistribution around that. And actually, if the country is going to address the poverty issue, it needs to go on a huge growth drive over the next 10 to 20 years. And I think a really important part of that is also about how government works with philanthropy and charity to ensure that families get access to opportunities to help secure some of that wealth, right? And to help build more passive sources of income so that young families, families from poorer backgrounds, I grew up in a single parent household, one of 5 kids, it's so important that we don't just look at this issue purely as one that is about charity, alleviation, and simply trying to just throw money at the problem. We also need to find ways to ensure that all families get access to opportunities to build wealth.
Well, thanks for that, Stephen. Anyone got any comments on what Stephen has said so far? Looking for what we need a whole new model, he said, and different ways of targeting young people. Phil Callahan from the Trussell Trust. Phil, I noticed you put something on the chat line about the 2-child limit. And you've also seen a rise, you're saying, of 20% in food parcels given to people aged 65 plus. So maybe my summary before about it being more of a problem among young people, the kind of poverty and deep poverty that we've mentioned so far is incorrect. Phil, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, that's it, Mick. I think it can be a mistake to separate different parts of the community and focus on the poverty that exists within them. We know that child poverty is an absolute scar in our society, and at Trussell we're really, really concerned about the numbers of parcels that we give out to families with young children. When we know that through all of the research that we've done and our partners have done, the impact that deep poverty has on children growing up, and how that affects their development and their education, things like that. So it's of a major concern, and that's why at Trussell we are fully behind the scrapping of the 2-child limit. And I know my colleagues in our policy team will be working with whoever forms the next government in a few weeks' time to really put pressure on the government to reconsider that and to hopefully have that scrapped during the next parliament. But at the same time, as you said, despite that triple lock on pensions, we've seen a 27% rise in people aged 65 plus needing to use a food bank over the last 12 months. So it really goes to show that the deep poverty and destitution is really prevalent across our society, across the demographic. And so we need to talk about that in a sort of whole community issue rather than trying to separate these communities out, I think.
Plucking 1 or 2 points from, say, the Labour Party manifesto, there'll be a review of some type on the 2-child block, but we've got they're promising 3,000 new nurseries and free breakfast clubs. Now, does that fall into the category of sticking plaster that I think Hannah mentioned before, or is that trying to tackle long-term and short-term poverty as well? Anyone got any comments on that? Because we do need to look at some of the points made in the manifestos. We know what we'd like, but so far, a lot of those points have not been reflected in the various manifestos that have been published.
Some of our perspective on what we've seen through some of the research that's emerged on trends in the Muslim community or Muslim communities across the country. My initial instinct on that would be that potentially that is sticking plaster, is what I notice about some of the commentary from that policy point on the manifesto. Is that, for example, you're looking at childcare, which is linked to supporting parents or those who are to sort of enable them to engage in work. What we don't necessarily see too much of a sense of commentary on is potentially childcare or additional support in order to support upwards occupational mobility. So are there considerations of providing childcare or additional support to those parents who may want to, who are not in employment, education, or training, or haven't been for a while, and have a low skill level, to upskill so that they can access better employment opportunities and potentially take themselves out of a cycle of poverty. Are there conversations around some of those matters which act in parallel to the working world, is what we understand even from exploring, the Muslim communities or others as well who have proximity to us, which is that the median wage for members of the Muslim community on average can be something around half of that of other members of the population. So it seems as if even over the past decade or so, our faith communities are still on a trend of downward mobility. So I'd question the extent of how effective this intervention would be, which again comes back to that conversation on equity, which is this a policy point or reform which is actually relevant to all communities? And will it disproportionately benefit some and create a divergence, or continue to expand that divergence that we're seeing amongst different communities?
I'd like to bring in Gareth McNabb from Christians Against Poverty on that. Gareth, is that something that you'd agree with what Madassa said about it really being different sections of society being affected at different levels by the kind of policy we spoke about there in terms of the free breakfast clubs or the extra nursery places?
It is absolutely horrendous that while poverty affects many aspects of society, it particularly targets people who are already excluded wrongly from a part of society based on their protected characteristics, like their race, like whether they are disabled, like their gender. Women more likely to experience poverty than men. People with disabilities more likely to experience it than those of us able-bodied. And as Madassa drew out there, Bangladeshi and Pakistani communities more likely to experience poverty than pretty much any other racial background. It's wrong. It's an injustice. We can design a better society than the one we're currently tolerating. On the free breakfasts that you picked up on in the Labour manifesto, there's a related policy proposal in the Liberal Democrat manifesto around free school meals, targeting that at more children who are experiencing poverty, and then eventually targeting all in primary education. On the one hand, I'd like to see a society where every household receives sufficient income that parents can make their choices about what they do with their income. The narrative that suggests that people are making poor choices is not really grasping the reality of there are swathes of society that only have poor options from which to choose. And making value judgments about other people's choices is a national pastime in Britain, but one that we should step well away from. And instead, we should be making sure that people have the options available to them. That said, another challenge that comes to these free breakfasts or these free school meals is, can we afford a universal benefit such as this? Why would the state pay for rich kids' breakfasts as well? And the point there is to reduce the stigma that is associated with poverty in so many parts of our society. When you can tell who gets a free school meal and who doesn't, we perpetrate and perpetuate the stigma in our society that that there is one of those free school meal kids. I remember, I'm only 42, and I remember queuing on the opposite side of the school hall for my lunch compared to the kids who were paying for their own, and still carry in my own life those memories. We need to get rid of that from our society, as well as the income inequality that is driving those kind of things. So I suppose in summary, free breakfasts at school, wouldn't it be lovely if parents had enough money to be able to choose the breakfasts that they feed their kids and the time of the day that they eat their meals? While we're not there yet in this society, let's at least make sure the support we offer is considering the dignity of the human beings that we're seeking to support with those kind of services.
Does anybody believe that we need a national food strategy? Because that's one of the key points in the Liberal Democrat manifesto on the cost of living. Okay, they'll say, well, free school meals to all children in poverty, and then, as Gareth said a bit later on, they'll try to spread it maybe. But they're talking about a national food strategy. Now, I'm not sure whether the other parties have actually gone for that, but is that something we need? Because when you look at the figures for deep poverty, particularly among younger people, as you already mentioned, young families. Maybe that's something we need. Obviously, what's in it is the key thing. But do we need something like that if we're going to tackle both short-term and long-term issues? Anyone can just comment.
Before I became an unpaid carer, I worked in the food industry for 30 years. And I actually worked in school meals for a while. So firstly, school meals wise, I am a firm advocate of free school meals and free breakfast, principally because it helps with academic attainment. And as Gareth just said, it also removes stigma. But in terms of a food strategy, all governments like going round and round in circles. We've had Henry Dimbleby's monstrous report. They were both ginormous. They took ages to write, and they simply went and sat on a shelf in DEFRA, and nothing ever will come from that. Now, Mr. Dimbleby, of course, became very frustrated by that and wrote his book Ravenous. But again, that is not going to ever become policy. Now, as I said, as someone who has worked in the food industry their entire career, my view is that any food strategy from any government needs to be almost immediate. It must be joined up with farming, and farming is actually my background, and it needs to be a very short supply chain that gets food to those who need it most as quickly as possible, as opposed to constantly looking after the supermarkets and the supermarkets' needs. We need to ensure that we get over this. We want a perfect apple every time, or things like that, because that just causes waste. And we do have a lot of waste in our supply chain here in the UK, products which never get actually harvested, and in fact actually get ploughed back into the land, like cauliflowers. Quite often they get ploughed back into the land because no one can be bothered to pick them. So there is a lot that I think needs to be done there. And it's about, the political will. I mentioned that before I became an unpaid carer, unpaid carers, of course, are pretty poor. But the point I'm making is that there are lots of people out there who perhaps could go and pick these products which the supermarkets don't want and try and get those into the supply chain.
Thanks, Tony. Bishop Mike Royal, I know you've gone public in the past as saying something that I didn't really expect anyone to say, but you're saying how much you love taxation. Now there's a whole story behind that, but you just want to explain to people.
This is a religious media webinar, and so I want to sort of root it kind of in certainly my Christian faith, and I'm reminded of the words of Jesus, who said, give to Caesar what's due to Caesar, and give to God what's due to God. And giving really is at the heart of common good and a flourishing society. And taxes, of course, are absolutely important for health, for education, and for all the issues that we've been talking about. The problem is that the way that debate has been framed in this election is a race to the bottom, and it's who will give the least taxes, and trying to catch different parties out kind of on how much they're going to be taxing people. But we know that some of the happiest nations in the world are nations that actually are quite much more heavily taxed than us. But what that has resulted in is much better public services. And I would just like to see that narrative change kind of moving forward. So no, definitely we don't want people to be overtaxed, and we don't want waste, but we do want tax to be used for the development of good public services.
Because I want to bring in Josh, because I have a feeling that Josh might not 100% agree with you on that. Josh Nicholson.
I think one of the sad things about politics and this election campaign is a lot of the parties make pitches to individuals and, we'll cut these taxes, we'll reduce your burden here, and this is why you should vote for us, rather than looking through the lens of what is the common good, what is best for flourishing. I don't think either party will be raising taxes necessarily. I don't think that will be part of their platform. They might have to if the public finances are worse than what Labour's been told, and they might have no choice but to raise taxes. But I don't think that will be part of their plans, mainly because the tax burden is at its highest. I think in recent memory. There are lots of ways in which we can think about communities flourishing as well. I mean, the government can do a lot, the government does a lot, but actually, how can we ensure that our community and our community charities and small grassroots organizations can thrive as well? There's some things that local authorities can do, statutory services can do, but actually we work with about 700 small charities across the country, many who are changing lives, tackling poverty in their local areas. These guys are struggling at the moment, and they find people, they love people in a way that the state just can't do. And actually, one of the challenges for the next government will be supporting those charities, those small organizations that are really under the cosh right now, and making sure they can thrive, because only when communities are working in partnership with the state can we really tackle poverty in the long term.
I just want to pick up on a bit of what Josh was saying, but also on what Bishop Mike was saying, and maybe also going back to your question about the Liberal Democrats' food strategy, because I think there's something in the conversation here about the bigger picture. And I think that obviously the devil is often in the detail and the specific policies, but there's something here about a bigger picture, which is about, reimagining the contribution of faith and belief and the values that underpin that to the society we want to live in. And obviously poverty connects with a lot of other issues. There are multiple challenges we're facing now, not only poverty, but connected to that, there's climate change, there's the ongoing, COVID-19 challenge, and the NHS and all the rest of it. So there are huge challenges facing our society. And I think, if you go back 80 years to the kind of foundation of the welfare state, you had Archbishop William Temple, creating the welfare state out of an exploration of how do you rebuild society after the kind of impact of the Second World War. And of course, the humanist Beveridge, his friend, the humanist Beveridge, sort of took on his recommendations, and the welfare state was born. So we're at a point now, I think, where we need to rediscover that kind of that value-based approach to creating the solutions to these multiple challenges that face society. And I think that is about broader strategy. I think it is about, as Archbishop Mike says, bringing in faith values. But I think fundamentally we need, and what Josh was saying about connectivity of charities, it's about how government connects and values the contribution of those organizations on the ground who know what the issues are, who build that social capital, and they need a real relationship with government if we're to find those solutions, and not acting piecemeal, but in a kind of really strategic, co-creation led way. And I think that's what we're calling out for, not only on poverty, but all the kind of multiple challenges that we're facing in society at the moment.
Echoing what Phil mentioned about bringing in faith values. So, of course, in the Islamic tradition, we have a very rich heritage of the welfare system going back 1400 years, which I understand that many of the systems have taken inspiration from. We have a form of taxation, which is the Zakat. That's fundamentally applied to a surplus, which is that it's only applied to those individuals, or an expectation on those individuals who can cover all of their base expenses and have a demonstrable significant surplus. Just as a point, according to my knowledge, I have yet to actually see any political party or anyone put forward a proposition on taxation that would raise the minimum threshold that you can earn before you start paying taxes to what the Living Wage Foundation believes is the value of money that you need on a full-time contract to actually live.
Well, I think you might be surprised to learn that I'm just looking from my paper here, that Reform UK, that's in their manifesto. I bet you weren't expecting me to say that, and I'm looking for the bit of paper it says on, but I think that is one of their their manifesto pledges. Not that they're likely to form the new government. I would have thought. We've got a comment now from Paul Morrison, who's got a comment on the attitudes to tax.
Yeah, I'd just like to say the British Social Attitudes Survey asks what people's attitudes to tax. They ask them, do they want to pay more tax, the same amount of tax, or less tax, with the effect on public services that would have. And they've asked it since the 1980s, and never has pay less tax and get worse public services got above 15%. It's always a toss-up between more tax and more public services, or keep it the same. And that has been consistent. And I think it speaks to what one of the things Hannah was talking about who gets a voice in our political debate. Because I think that those who want less tax seem to have dominated the political debate for some time. And just as importantly, when you say tax, we traditionally think about income tax and national insurance and possibly even corporation tax. But the taxes the poorest pay are increasingly council tax and increasingly VAT, and are also duties. So when we talk about tax cutting, we're usually talking about cutting the taxes that the richest in society pay most of. So if we want to have a real debate about tax, we should have a debate about tax with those who experience poverty and the taxes that they pay.
Just take very, very quickly on the kind of Bevan NHS moment point. I think that's a really important point, but I think, a new government, there's a couple of things that they're going to have to do in order to create new units, new structures, to work in that completely reimagined way. One is, I think, a new government is going to have to create new units, new teams that aren't caught on tackling the immediate issues. We're going to need futures teams that are really focused on what does it look like to design an NHS for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years? What does it look like to create a system that supports families for the next 20, 30, 40 years? And so I think that's really important. And I actually think the other thing I'd say is that a new government is going to have to really lead the way, really kind of set a direction for other resources, whether that's private resources, philanthropic resources, charity resources, to align and help to deliver impact. Because actually we're in a world where we are, seeing whether it's Russia, China, other countries, the state is dictatorial, right? And it's just channeling resources towards the things that it wants to do. And I think we've also got to say, look, we need a strong state that sets a clear direction for other sources of capital and resources to help tackle our issues and to help grow the economy. So, yeah.
Right, thanks for that, Stephen. I thought we'd end by, if we can be as brief as possible, if there was one particular action that you would want the new government to take to tackle poverty and to tackle deep poverty, because that's the worst type, what would it be? And if we can run through you and just say briefly what and why, and then we'll wrap up. And I'll tell you what the next few debates organised by the Religion Media Centre will entail. So if we start with you, Madassa, if you can keep your response fairly crisp, that would be great. And we'll run through everyone and I think that's quite a nice way to nap up. Whether we'll get there or not, who knows? We don't know. But Madassa, to start with you, if that's okay.
I would like to see the government commit to high-impact strategic interventions at some of the root causes of poverty and ensure that minoritized communities' voices are represented in those.
I would like to see government understand that the purpose of the welfare system is to ensure that people can meet their basic needs.
I'd like to ensure, at a strategic level, that faith and belief communities, the diverse faith and belief communities, are included in policy making for in their respective policy areas. Picking up on that future theme, I quite like that idea. But engage with those faith and belief communities, the values and experience they bring. That's what we need. I'd like to see that.
Theos would like the next government to see is that what we want is not people to just barely have the minimum so they can survive. It's that they can flourish in their life and reach their full potential. And that's the goal. The goal is not crossing the minimum threshold.
I'd like to see a new government design ways for people experiencing poverty to be included in decision making through our systems and structures at an equal level.
I'll be slightly more specific. I would like the government to establish a commission for formulating a national minimum living income benchmark, and then for the commission that establishes it to recommend uprating different elements of the social security system so that every working age person can meet a national minimum living income, as we recommended in a 2022 report called Building Up.
Yeah, I would really like to see investment in early years that's giving children the best start in life. So many of our faith organisations are involved in that. So co-creation with faith organisations around early years would, for me, be really important. We need huge investment in that area.
I believe I agree with everything that previous contributors have shared. A different thing I would add is to see, I would like to see the government stop relying on charity to be the backstop to our social security, so that the positives that charities bring their local communities can be celebrated. We shouldn't be organizations that are preventing people from dying of hunger. We should be organizations that are celebrating the strengths of local communities. We shouldn't be the safety net to the safety net.
Just echoing what others have said, we need a social security system which really doesn't force people to food banks, doesn't force people into poverty, but covers the cost of the essentials. And we would like to see an essentials guarantee enshrined into law so that the rate of universal credit never falls below the cost of what it means to pay for life's essentials.
We'd like the government to support fragile families and prevent family breakdown, which costs upwards of £50 billion a year on the state. Then perhaps we would reduce the burden on public services, and we would see more freedom for families to get involved in local communities to thrive in the future.
Well, look, thanks for everyone that managed to take part today. I'm really sorry we couldn't get to all the questions and the hands up, but really appreciate your contributions. The topics to be covered by the Religion Media Centre before July the 4th election day. Our election briefings, the list is on the website, but the issues to be discussed are this Thursday, it's climate change and how faith groups will work with the new government, which is something we've touched on a lot today. How faith groups will work with the new government will be next Tuesday. Thanks for joining us. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.